Okay, it says we're live, so let's hopefully we're live. This is Josh Wonder, and I'm coming to you today from the Bring Them Home project at bringthemhome.org.il, as well as the israeltorah.org. And I'm here today with our co-hosts, my co-host and my other panelists, Yehuda Shamroth. I don't know why your names aren't showing. Yehuda Shamroth and Rabbi Winston. So I'm going
Welcome, everybody.
to,
Yehuda Shamroth from the Miriam Project and Rabbi Winston from Telstone and 36.org.
yes, we're gonna show some of his stuff, but I just wanted to make sure that that people can hear us. So if
I'm
somebody can
seeing you
just make,
online. I see us on your page right now.
if someone can comment and just say that they see us, and there should be people in the studio right now. Great. Okay. There's some other people that are joining. I'm not sure how they got this link. Okay. No problem. Okay. Rabbi Winston, the topic for tonight is unbridled falsehoods about the Geula process. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to first introduce you. Rabbi Winston is an author, and I'm going to pull up his page over here. He's written numerous books, including his latest one, Preparing for Redemption, and that can be found on 36.org. And I recommend you go over there to see his stuff. By the way, I just have to make it clear that we are going through a transition period because we were using previously Zoom, and now we are using a different platform. So therefore, it's a learning process, and excuse us if there's any technical difficulties. I know there are many people out there that have difficulty either accessing the live streams on Facebook or YouTube, and we're going to be working on that, a specific link to a website where people can access it. But hopefully, in the coming weeks, it'll all be sorted out. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Rabbi Winston to start his talk.
Okay, thank you again, the opportunity. I don't think anybody's really surprised by the title. I think Unbridled Falsehood is something that resonates a lot today with a lot of people, because anybody who's watching the news or sees what's going on or see how people behave today, that the amount of falsehood, the amount of sheker freely being used. I mean, we're a generation, I guess, that probably false news has always existed, but it became a coined term in our generation. And if you see what's going on, today in the media with politicians and everything, and the amount of lying that seems to go on. Now, again, just as a just to point out that everything that we know, for the most part, is fed to us by one media source or another. I've not investigated anything personally other than what I can find online and what I've read and heard. But there are all these various different opinions, clearly contradicting one another, and evidence has come up about foul play and things have been going on by people who are supposed to be in charge of the truth, so to speak. They're supposed to be the ones who are protecting the truth, ultimately speaking, and they seem to be the worst candidates for that based upon what we're reading and seeing. Again, I don't know exactly, and it's I can't say for sure anything. Conspiracy theories abound, information from both sides, disinformation. It's a very difficult thing to know exactly what's the bottom line with most things, other than what's happening in our own personal lives that we eyewitness to and we participate in. And is it just a sign of the times? It's always been there. People have lied from the very beginning, going back all the way in time. It seems to be a natural human trait to distort the truth and change the truth when it protects us, because we're afraid of the consequence. It takes a very strong, disciplined person to be able to admit to the truth and pay the price of their mistake. For being honest, that wasn't a mistake. The mistake was what they did, what they could have lied about. But being honest is the right thing you're supposed to do. Not always, as the Gemara points out, is telling the truth the right thing to do. There are times definitely when a lie might be better, the change of the truth might be better. But it's a slippery hill. It's tricky business. The Gemara points this out. It's very easy to kid yourself into believing that what you're doing is in fact the right thing when in fact you're protecting yourself, even though you're saying you're protecting somebody else and others, But for the most part, honesty is important and crucial, and it's very hard to watch what's going on today. And for many, it's shocking. It's the actual amount of lying and cheating and stealing and whatever's going on. It's just, on one hand, the population is very big, so it's more rampant because there are a lot more people who could do it today. Once upon a time, the population was half the size, or quarter the size, and therefore it was less rampant. But today we have so many people who can do things like that. So it's just a historical reality that has nothing to do with anything, in terms of Geula and redemption. So the first thing is to recall that the Gemara speaks about this in Sanhedrin. Actually, Tzadei Zayin Amud Aleph, which is 97a in Tractate Sanhedrin of the Talmud. It actually speaks about it elsewhere as well, but this is one of the main places it talks about it. And it's talking about different simanim, different things that are going to happen in advance of Mashiach's arrival. One of the things it says, I'll read to you exactly, translation, during the generation in which Moshiach ben David comes, the truth will be missing, as it is stated in a verse from Yeshayahu, and the truth is lacking. The Hebrew word is ne'ederis, and the one who departs from evil is negated. In other words, if you want to be an honest person and be involved in truth, then you're gonna be ignored. You're gonna be vilified. You're the villain. You're the bad guy by wanting to be involved in truth, and it'll be missing. It'll be lacking. But as we said, that that's not unique to our generation. There's lots of times in history when people were constantly lying. In the very beginning of history, people rewrote history or wrote it the way they liked it. They didn't tell the truth necessarily. They would write history as if they were gods, as if everything went in their favor, and they would lie and they would cheat. The Russians started to do this even later in history, in more recent times in Stalin's time, and also the Germans as well tried to rewrite history. So it's not such an unusual thing that people are not telling the truth. So the question is, why does Rabbi Yehuda feel that it's necessary to point out that this is going to be a siman on Mashiach's arrival, as if it's something out of the ordinary? And the answer is because it has to be out of the ordinary. There must be something about the lying in the period of time in advance of Mashiach's arrival that's going to be unique to history, not like other times in history. And that's the reason why it's going to be a siman. So the question is, what's unique about our period and the lying going on today and the corruption that we have today, that it's specifically a sign that Mashiach is about to arrive. So a little bit further on the same page of the Gemara, talking about the various different simanim, different signs that Mashiach's arrival is imminent, it says also the following thing as well. It says, Rabbi Yitzchak says, Ben David will not come until the entire kingdom will turn to heresy, epicursis, right? But everybody's going to become a heretic in the government, so to speak. Well, not necessarily every single individual, but governments as a whole, for the most part, will be heretical in their way of thinking. Now, when you hear that word, you think, thunder and lightning coming down from the sky, people doing terribly evil things. But the reality is that if you look at the governments, they're completely secular. And let's say for the non-Jewish world, that's not commanded in Torah mitzvahs, that's less of a problem because they have Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and they're much easier to keep. There's a lot fewer of them. And so the problem would exist more in Eretz Yisrael, where we are supposed to be living by Torah. So that when our Supreme Court or the Prime Minister or government acts in any way that's contrary to Torah, that's considered to be heretical. It may just seem like politics, it may just seem like secular people do, but in a general sense, or even a very specific sense, in a conceptual sense, that's called heresy. We may be used to it, we may have accepted it, we may have adapted to it and learned to work around it or with it, but it doesn't change the reality that it's not the Torah way of approaching politics and the decision making. But even if the nations of the world only have to live by 7 mitzvahs, they're not doing that either. I mean, if they do, it's more accidental than anything else. They don't believe in Torah. They don't necessarily believe in the 7 mitzvahs b'nai Noach, and they're not trying to abide by them because they have their own legal system, however it came to them. They're constantly amending it to suit the times, basically. And so that's it's a problem for them as well. So this again, a point just to make clear that the world will be, from God's perspective, that's the one that counts the most, will be heretical, heresy all over the place. So that means, because heresy is the opposite of truth, that basically people will have abandoned the source of truth. Now, that's a very important difference, because even though people have always lied, there's two types of lies, basically. The truth is there's more than two types of lie, but for this discussion, there's two types of lies that really concern us. There's a lie where you know the truth, you know it, you know what the truth is, right? But you're afraid to admit to it. You're afraid to live by it for whatever reason. You're lazy, sloppy. You have a difficult time living up to certain spiritual expectations. So you change the truth to justify, to rationalize. But deep inside your heart, inside yourself, you know that's a sheker. And if someone calls you on it, then you're going to be forced to admit to it and backtrack. There's a second type of lie, which is not only are you lying, but you actually convinced yourself that the lie is the truth. You're actually living with the lie as if it is in fact the truth. And many people do that. Many people have done that. And of course, that's the most dangerous lie of all, because at least with the first one, there's room for a guilty conscience. There's room for charata, for regret, to change, to admit to the truth. But in the second case, where people actually lie as if the lie itself is the truth, then as far as they're concerned, they've done no wrong. And they're doing no wrong. And there's nothing to change. There's nothing to fix. And that's kind of the world we have today. So there's a reason for that. And that's what the Gemara is alluding to. And if you understand this and appreciate this, first of all, not only does it fix your own connection to emes and truth, but it will help you understand better where we're holding today, what's going on, and why it's such an important siman for Mashiach's arrival. So once upon a time, true or false had one meaning, right? It was pretty black and white. It was either true or it was false. The truth is really that last time we actually lived on that kind of a level was in the Garden of Eden before Adam ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. At that stage, Adam was an extremely high spiritual level, and his connection to God and truth was far more sublime than ours was. And as people have pointed out, if he saw something that went contrary to the will of God, he wouldn't say, stop, that's wrong. He would say, stop, that's false. It's either true or false, like 0 or 1. It's like one or the other. It can't be something in between. Then he ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and that clouded his judgment and the judgment of all mankind, and lowered us to a level of good and evil. And they sound like the same, true and false, good and evil, but the reality is that one person's good is another person's evil, and another person's evil is another person's good, and that's the way it is around the world. You have different countries that function and operate with different customs and traditions, and if you do something in that country, it's considered to be a bad thing. You do that in another country, it's considered to be a good thing. So that's the beginning of that change back in the time of Adam HaRishon. But the real change, what really happened to make things different, was the fact that man got a Yetzer Hara. That's what happened at the time of the Chet. Before the sin, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, man's instinctual desire to protect himself and to do what's comfortable for him, mostly physically, that came as a result of the Chet, as a result of the sin. The snake, so to speak, entered man, and whereas before the Yetzer Hara was outside of us, and we could say, hey, that's the Yetzer Hara speaking. It's not me speaking, it's the Yetzer Hara speaking. When Chava talked to the snake, it was clearly Chava having a conversation with the Yetzer Hara outside of her, and therefore it was easier to distinguish which voice was which. When we absorbed the Yetzer Hara, it became part of us, and it shares the same brain, and it shares the same vocal cords, and it shares the same thought to a large degree. So it's very, very easy to confuse one for the other and think that what we're thinking is in fact what we want, but in fact might be the Yetzer Hara. We'll come back to that point with Israel Hashem. But the main point is that if you basically cut yourself off from the source of truth, then by definition you're not going to be connected to it in any way. Why is that? Because in order to be able to know the truth, right, the concept of truth itself implies something absolute, like absolute truth, and universal, right? If something is true for me, it should be true for everybody. That's the mashma'ut. That's the implication of truth. Good can be subjective. Evil can be subjective. But objectively speaking, right, truth should be something that everybody has to hold by. Otherwise, how can it be a truth? Truth is like an axiom to a large degree. So if you're not going to hold by any absolute truth that's universal, right, by definition, therefore, you can only be subjective. Objective means that there's this reality that exists outside of me and outside of my opinion. This is the reality. And it describes it in the most absolute terms. If I don't believe that that's possible to know, if I don't believe in a source of that, then by definition, all I'm left with is a subjective opinion of reality. Even if I look at the exact same painting as somebody else, my interpretation would be biased. And so would the other person's interpretation. And 15 people looking at the same painting will have 15 different interpretations of the same painting. And they all swear they're seeing what they're seeing. But of course, subjectively, it's not true because they have one way of looking at reality based upon their past and their personal experiences. So it's important to know that by definition, if you're not going to believe in the concept of absolute truth, and you're not going to find out if it actually exists, and you're not going to find out what it has to say if it turns out that it does exist, or these people claim it exists, then the best you can do, the best anybody can do, is have an opinion. That's all it can be. My opinion versus your opinion. To not believe in God, by definition, for a person to be an evolution, a Darwinist, and not believe in God, not believe in absolute truth, for a scientist to come in and say, no, there's no need for God. I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. They can't know truth, not absolute truth. And really, their own version of truth is all they can have an access to, because it comes down to simply an opinion. Why is that the case? Because I, as a human being, and the same as any other human being, can never know enough information about the universe in which we live, both the parts we can see and the parts we can't see. The parts we can't see and we don't even know about, it's not even relevant to us, but they all play a role in the overall picture of my separations of creation. So if I cannot know every last detail of what reality is about, what this world is about, I can't know absolute truth. And certainly we fall far short of that measure. Our knowledge is extremely limited. Our own personal cumulative knowledge is extremely limited. And we're always adding to it, and we're always revising it because we understood it that way in the beginning, and now things have changed, and new discoveries, and new thought process, and new understanding. So all we're left with is our subjective opinion, and that's really what the world is today. You're taking God out of the picture, and the moment people say, "I don't believe in God," they're actually saying, "I don't believe in absolute truth. I don't believe in an objective truth." If you don't believe in an objective truth, then what's left in the end? Well, my opinion is my opinion, your opinion is your opinion, and it becomes hefker. It becomes possible to reshape reality as you see fit, as you think is good, right? But your good is based upon what you were when you first were born. Even your soul plays a role in your personality, and then your parents and your siblings and your school and the media and your teachers and your friends, and all these things are shaping your point of view, mostly by the age of 12, 13, when the fundamental architecture of a person's brain is basically set. And from that point onward, no matter how smart you become after that, you're interpreting the events of your life and the world through your own personal eyes and biases that you grew up with. So that's one part of the problem, okay? That we cannot know enough on our own to know what truth is, to have an objective standard against which to measure our interpretations of reality. That's problem number one. The second problem is actually, in some respects, more serious, because, as I mentioned before, as a result of the chet of Adam HaRishon, the sin of eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, one of the main consequences was that we absorbed the Yetzer Hara. Now, there's different ways to look at exactly what the Yetzer Hara is. There's a Kabbalistic approach, and there's a very simple approach, and we can define it a number of ways. But the essential reality of the Yetzer Hara seems to be something more instinctual. The body has an instinct, and that instinct tends to cause us to behave in ways that could be positive and good for us, but a lot of times actually work against us in the long run. Today, mindfulness is a major topic of discussion, and people are implementing it to try to get more out of life and business, and to just enhance all the things that they're doing. And what it's basically doing, what mindfulness actually does, is it gives you a chance to defend against the Sahara, because the Yetzer Hara is quick to respond, because we respond instinctually. You hear something, bells go off, it's a positive thing, you get excited. Negative things, it's an insult, you get upset. You emotionally react. And it happens all very quickly before you even think about it. Chazal said, Hamsuni Bedin. It says in Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, you have to be delivered in judgment. Judgment takes time. You have to weigh things out. The more important, more serious the matter, the more we do that. And someone says, do you want to invest 5 cents in something without even asking a question? You reach in your pocket, take out 5 cents, and you invest it. What's 5 cents? I lose it. What's the big deal? But if someone says you want to buy, invest $5,000, well, now I've got to think about that. $500,000, you can come up such money. I have to think a lot more. It may take a couple of days to digest the information. I got to do some research. I have to hear you out and weigh this and weigh that, because that's the way judgment works. Judgment implies a process which takes time, and if it's not going to be done properly, then a person's going to make faulty judgment. The Yetzer Hara does not care about judgment. It hears and responds instinctively. Psychologists talk about flight or fight, right? Flight or fight. 2 major reactions we have, or central reactions we have to a situation. Either we fight, meaning that we get offended or something, or whatever the case may be. We feel threatened, and we will fight. If we feel incapable of fighting and we become afraid, then we'll run. These are the 2 main reactions a person has to almost any given situation. It can show up in different forms, but these are 2 that they've identified. But these are Yetzer Hara reactions, basically, because they're instinctual. Am I being threatened? What's my instinct say? Because if I have to rely upon my mind all the time to determine whether or not I am being threatened, I can get killed in the meantime. You don't always have the time to make a decision about whether or not I should do X, Y, or Z to protect myself. I'm not in danger. One of the ways they actually train Navy SEALs, I once watched a documentary on Navy SEALs, very fascinating. It was all part of it, actually, to do with the brain more than anything else, and they just use this as an example. And by Navy SEALs, they would go into an operation, and the problem they had was they didn't always have the time to decide if the person they're about to shoot was a friend or a foe. So you could easily shoot a friend. I mean, lots of soldiers die by friendly fire, because you don't always have the time to decide whether or not this is a good thing or a bad thing to do. And you have to be able to make a split decision. So they train them to actually be very emotionalist, be very, very cool and calculating, and not let the Yetzer Hara get involved in the process, so that maybe they can speed up the thought process and make a decision fast enough. And this is something that is all part of everyday life. But the Yetzer Hara is built into the body. It can pick up vibes even, and it can determine, often wrongly, that it's a time to fight or it's a time to flight, to run away from the situation. There's lots of times that people fought and they shouldn't have. There's lots of times that people ran and they shouldn't have in the end. But that's the way it's a gamble that we have to take, and it can save lives. Sometimes people have simply felt wrong about a situation, and before they could process the information, they ran away to save their life. Other times they didn't, and that was the right thing to do as well at that particular time. I'm so glad I did leave. My first instinct was to run away, but I stayed, and it turns out it was the best thing in the world for me. So that's why instinct is a very important thing. The downside of instinct is it can be very wrong, and often is, because life is a lot more complicated than what it seems to be on the surface. And if you don't have a way to bridle the Yetzer Hara, because as the Gemara points out, that it's not so much an issue of destroying and killing the Yetzer Hara, that will come in good time. It'll happen in the Messianic era. It's going to happen when a person dies. The main point of the Yetzer Hara, it's a koyach, it's an energy. And the goal is to actually harness its power. Sometimes it's just too hard to do that in the proper way, so we stay away from it. But other times, the Gemara talks about it's important to harness the power in a very positive way. And every avera that the Yetzer Hara pushes a person to do can easily be turned into a mitzvah if done the right way, the right parameters, with the right intentions. That's a large part of Torah is about that. And so instinct is part of our everyday life. But as mentioned before, that if it's not going to be bridled, if it's not going to be harnessed, if it's not going to be understood and accepted, then basically a person will fall prey to it. If you don't even believe in it, you don't accept the reality of it, and you hear voices in your head telling you, or you feel instinct to do something, you're going to assume that's you. And therefore, if it's me and I want that, and since the Yetzer Hara loves material comfort because that's what feels good, the body is sensual, it's got senses, and it's Yetzer Hara to protect. It's not just a question of protecting from danger, but the idea of protection goes a long way when the Yetzer Hara. Fancy meals, fancy clothing, whatever it takes to make the Yetzer Hara feel good. So this is pushing a person, and if a person thinks it's them, they will in fact pursue that lifestyle as if it is them, and they'll start playing with the truth and distorting it. There's two problems, therefore, just to review. The problem is that we can't know absolute truth on our own. And if we don't know it, everything is subjective. Everything is an opinion, and not such an educated one either, for that matter. And the second problem is that we have Yetzer Hara, which is a strong drive within every individual, and therefore can easily convince a person, push a person, influence a person to pursue that which satisfies the desires and wants of the Yetzer Hara at the cost of truth. So these things come together, and you have pretty much the way society is functioning today. It has for a long time. But you just have to realize that for quite a period of time, for better or for worse, or right or wrong, religion played a much larger role in the lives of mankind, going back to, all the way back to 330 CE, when the Roman Empire accepted Christianity as its religious way of life. Until that, they didn't have it. It was idol worship. But even then, idol worship was a religious type of a thing. There was this idea floating around for a long time about deities and higher truths and things like that. And therefore, that had an influence on a lot of people. But in our society, our modern society, which basically destroyed the concept of God and therefore absolute truth, has unleashed the Yetzer Hara in ways that are almost unfathomable. Sitting in the top of a skyscraper, business offices, producing things that really are not good for us because the Yetzer Hara wants it and because they want to make money. Greed is so rampant all through all of society. All the tivers, the desires, Hollywood and the movies and the entertainment business and the clothing and the food, all these things together that we just call modern society. Really, if you stand back and look at it, what's driving people to live like that? That's the Yetzer Hara to a large degree. On Shabbos, when you're trying to serve Hashem, you're trying to come closer to God, and the rabbis, the Torah has told us, and the rabbis have interpreted and explained to us that getting dressed up in nice clothing, but not too fancy, nice, respectable, right? Having nice meals, good food, but not too much good food, but a nice meal that's mechubed, that's honorable, for the sake of Shabbos, L'chaved Shabbos Kodesh, for the sake of Shabbos, not for my sake, not for my palate, not for my stomach. That's a byproduct, a nice byproduct. It's like being in the right place at the right time. But really, in a sense, you're feeding Shabbos. Fine, that's good. But when it's self-serving, when it's just because I've got this taiva, I've got this desire, to have these things, that's basically the Yetzer Hara. If it's not harming, if it's something that will help you serve God better in the future, there's all kinds of ways to fit things that we do into our lives and still justify it. But the power of rationalization is very strong. We have to be careful about that. So these are the two issues. The Gemara says that there's a whole story in the Gemara about the rabbis where they were upset about the fact that this is the time of the Second Temple, that idol worship was so prevalent in their time that they actually prayed to God that he would allow them to destroy the Yetzer Hara for idol worship. And it says that a petik, some type of like note, fell from Shemaim to the ground, and on it was the word emes, was the word truth. And the Gemara learns out from this that the seal, the official company seal, the seal of God is emes, is truth. The question is, what does the Gemara mean by this? We know that God, by definition, is truth. He can't be anything other than truth. He is reality. If truth is the most accurate description of reality there is, well, he's that. So by definition, he is truth. Fine, we know that. We live by that rule. Even the person who doesn't believe in God, you were to ask them, but if there was a God, would he be the essence of truth? I think that most people would have to say yes, which is probably why they don't want to believe in God in the first place, because they don't want to have to confront that reality of truth. That's a Torah game. So what does the Gemara mean by saying that the seal of God is truth? Because everything the rabbis say and phrase a specific way and describe like this as opposed to that is because there's some nuance of understanding built into it for us to better understand how God works and how to interact with him so we can maximize the potential of our lives. So if they call it a chotamet, a seal, there must be something special about that. So we know, for example, that a company seal, right? Companies have a seal, official seals. These little stamps they have might be in wax, right? And the basic idea is like this: a company seal is used to stamp a company's important documents to show that a document is certified and agreed upon by the board of directors of the company. It creates a presumption that the document is validly executed, acknowledged, or witnessed, since the seal is unique to the sealer. So that's the way it's used in the business world. Also, who needs the seal? What's the seal for? Because I can't always be there when the document is being validated. I can't always know if this document is authentic. Maybe it's forged. So one of the precautions that the business world takes against forgery and lying and all these falsifications is by issuing specific company seals to a company, and then they can stamp it, and that stamp says, yes, we say this is official and we agree to the contents of this document and letter, so you can work based upon that premise. So then how does it apply to God? So it would mean basically the same thing. That's the way a seal works. In the old days, people had rings, and they would stamp it into the wax. That was their seal. They wore it as a ring. Right? So what's God's stamping, so to speak? There's another way the Gemara is saying that unless what you're doing has God's official seal, stamp of approval on what you want to accomplish, what you're accomplishing, it's sheker. Unless what you're doing would get God's approval, unless what you're doing, by God, yeah, I stamped that. I'm in agreement with that. That's a good thing to do. It's a good thing to think about. It's a good thing to speak about. Unless God does that, what you're doing by definition is sheker, is falsehood. That's the measuring stick. So you have to ask yourself the question when you're about to do something, especially if it's questionable. It could be even a mitzvah. A person puts on a tefillin in the morning. There's different ways to put on tefillin. You can wrap it as speed wrapping, right? And get it on and barely think about it. I mean, you just woke up first in the morning. Some people go literally out of bed into the minyan. Today it's much easier because we done by our houses, so you can just literally go from your bed outside in a matter of 2 minutes, and you're still half asleep, and you put on your tefillin, and there's a certain declaration, but you didn't have time to say it this time, and even when you said it, you didn't have kavanah for it, you didn't have intention for it, and you just put it on, right? So you did a mitzvah, fantastic. You made a brocha, like you're supposed to, but did you think about the brocha? Would God come down and say, yes, that's a good brocha, I like that brocha, wow, look at the way this guy puts on tefillin. That's someone who appreciates the mitzvah and the beauty behind the idea and what it's doing for him and connecting me to him and him to me. Wow, this is some Shabbos table. And I say Shabbos table, God says, not just because the food's good, because I'm not even tasting it. It's because what's going on there is so Shabbostic. It shows that these people are connected. And we're all guilty of making that mistake of not thinking about that. When we do anything, but even when we do mitzvahs, if you're doing something that's legally questionable, halakhically questionable, Of course, you have to wonder whether God's going to agree to this. But sometimes, we have a situation called bidi evid in halacha. Okay, you didn't get it right the first time. You didn't do what you're supposed to do. But now the situation is like this. For example, you're not supposed to stir a pot of cholent on Shabbos while it's sitting on the fire. A blech, right? There's a blech over the fire gas stove. You have this big pot there sitting from the night before, the day before, and some guy comes down and thinks it's burning, and rather than take the cholent off the fire like he's supposed to, while it's still there, he makes a mistake. He thinks it's okay because the cholent was already cooked anyhow for like 10 hours. So I figure it's all cooked anyhow. He goes out, he stirs the cholent, and now he's made a mistake because the halacha says you can't do this. So now what do? You throw the cholent out? Can't eat the cholent because something wrong was done with it? No, bidi evid, meaning it was already done. It's after the fact, right? So bidi evid, in this situation like that, you should eat the cholent. A person could come along and say, no, I'm not going to touch this cholent because something wrong happened here, and I don't want to do anything with anything that was wrong on Shabbos. I will go with it, the meal instead. I will suffer a lesser meal than to have that cholent that was stirred on the fire on Shabbos. Wrong. If you like that cholent, if that's the main part of your meal, you're supposed to eat it. If you stirred it purposely, that's a different story. But it was accidental. It's after the fact. It's the main part of your meal. God will come down and tell you, eat that cholent if you want it, if you enjoy it. You have to know. You have to know what is the right thing. But the starting point is, asking yourself the question, would this get God's stamp of approval? So, even if a person does not believe in God, they still have to agree that a man-made truth really is an oxymoron. You can't have it. Because of the fact that our knowledge can't be absolute, it's only personal, subjective, by definition, it can't be truth. It's only going to be opinions, we said before. On the other hand, if God not only exists, which of course he does, and he even shared his truth with man, then a person who learns it by definition, who learns Torah and lives by Torah by definition, will have as much access to absolute truth as is humanly possible. That's the first point. They will have an objective and essential standard against which to accurately and meaningfully measure their interpretation of life, worthy of God's seal of approval. You're looking right at the truth. So therefore, you will have that standard in order to be able to know, is this right, is this wrong, is this true, is this false? You can take the good and the bad, the good and the evil, which seem to be subjective, right? You can take that and you can measure what you are doing in terms of that absolute standard, because you have access to God's truth. That's what the Torah provides. Now, the Medrash says, interesting enough, the Medrash says that when God decided to make creation, he took the Torah and used it as a blueprint. So you might ask the question, say, wait a second, the Torah, as far as I know, was given much later on in history. Mount Sinai took place after Abraham, after Yitzchak, after Yaakov, after Egypt. In fact, it took place 2,448 years after the world was created. So how is it possible that God used the Torah as the blueprint? So the answer, of course, is that's when we got it. That's when we received Torah. That's when God revealed it. But as the Medrash points out, Torah existed 2,000 years. Years, not our years, just a figure of speech, a figure of terminology, that it predates creation by a long way. And Kabbalah explains how that's possible. What it means, Torah goes back very, very far in time. Creation is the middle of the story, not the beginning of the story. Har Sinai is well into the story, not the beginning of Torah. So therefore, Torah is in fact the blueprint for creation. What is it? Again, the rabbis use this terminology. Like, what does it mean? Why say it like that? So having somewhat of a background in architecture, I can tell you that it's a very powerful lesson, because when you're an architect, when you're a designer, when you're used to working with plans. My father was an interior designer, and I worked in his office for many years when I was growing up, and even after I was married, I went back to working for a while, and in the old days when I was a young boy, I used to fold the plans of the old jobs that were completed. So my job to earn extra money and be exposed to the business was to take the plans, fold them up nicely, put them in a manila envelope, and store them for future reference. And I often spent a lot of time looking at the plans, looking at the drawings, and they're very precisely drawn and often, very beautifully drawn architecturally speaking. And I would study them. I was planning anyhow to go to architecture in school, and you get to know the plans very well sometimes, and very often, even in the middle of the job, I would get exposed to the plans, and then my father would take me on a site visit. And it was always a challenge, a very enjoyable challenge, to look at the structure and try to reverse engineer the structure, so to speak, to see it back in the plans. I mean, the builders were working right from the plans. The plans were right there on the table. They knew what to do and how to build them, which bolts to use, and how to attach them, and which company was responsible for which part of the project, because the plans had all detailed all of that. But you can take the project, and this very day, it's very common for me to walk into a new structure, especially, or any building, and imagine what's behind the paint, what's behind the concrete, what's behind the drywall, what type of construction they must have used, what type of beam must have been necessary to be able to cantilever out so far without any support below it, et cetera, et cetera. That's the building itself is a three-dimensional projection of the plans. So if you look at the building and you study it, you can reverse that and go back to the plans again, which means in this situation that a person should be able to look at creation, at all aspects of creation, and reverse engineer and go back to Torah. Noah did that. As Rashi points out, Noah learned Torah in his time. But how did he do that? Because he looked at creation and he saw what God was doing. That's why he believed in his soul, and that's why he went with God against the advice of the rest of the generation. Avraham is the most famous for that. Avraham literally taught himself the entire Torah by looking at creation. It was long before God spoke to him and told him a lot of the details that Avraham already understood what Torah was about because of creation and what it looked like and how it appeared to him and how it functioned. So a person should be able to do that, and we can. And and if you start learning Torah, it becomes even easier to look at creation and figure it all out and see the hand of God in all of it. But if you don't, then you're going to be locked and blocked. And even though it's possible, not enough people were doing it. And even the ones who were doing it weren't doing it well enough. So therefore, at Mount Sinai, God came along and he said, I'm going to give you my Torah. I'm going to give you the blueprint. I'm going to make it accessible to you. So you can study it. You can learn by it. And the mitzvahs inside the Torah and the narrative inside the Torah are like beams and columns and bolts and screws that hold all of creation together. That's what the Torah actually is. And every structure is designed based upon purpose. If you're going to design a kitchen, it has to be a kitchen. You can't make it look like a living room and function like a living room. If it's going to be a house, it has to be a house. It can't be like a convention center. I mean, you could try it, but it's not going to work the same way. Purpose defines the structure. So therefore, by having the Torah, a person can not only understand the purpose of creation and how best to use it, but they can understand themselves, what they're doing here, and how best to fit in, and how best to use the opportunity of creation with the opportunity of life and maximize the potential and achieve personal fulfillment. So it's worth pointing out that as simple as that sounds, it's actually a very, very deep and profound concept, because as the Arizal points out, the famous Kabbalist Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, who lived in the 1500s, and the Gemara in Chagiga also points out, there's a concept called Pardes. Pardes is a Hebrew word that means orchard. It's actually what we call a Rosh Tevos, meaning it's like an acronym, that each of the letters of Pardes, Pes, Resh, Pei, Resh, Dalid, and Samach are actually the first letters of 4 different words. And those 4 different words are 4 different levels of Torah called Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Pshat means a simple explanation. the simple understanding, like a simple verse in the Chumash. Bereshis barakim es Hashem v'sa'aretz, in the beginning God made the heaven and the earth. Right? What does that mean? What I just said. In the beginning, God made the heaven and the earth. That's a simple explanation of the verse. The second word is remez, which means hints. You can learn from a hint. A hint, you wink at somebody, means like there's something else going on here, but I can see that's going on because you're winking at the person, but I can't tell from your winking what it means. I have to investigate to find out, but at least I know to investigate because I can see the wink. So that's the idea of hint. So Rashi points out that there's a hint in the very first word, Bereshis, to a deeper understanding. What is that? Well, Bereshis is not the proper form of the word. If you want to say in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth, you should use the word Berishona. That's the proper Hebrew word in that context. What's Bereshis? It's a constructive word, doesn't belong there. Now, obviously, God intended that. He's teaching us something. So even though we interpret it the right way, it's actually alluding to it's hinting to a deeper level of information. And Rashi explains what that is. Rashi explains that the word Bereshis is actually two words, the base and the word Reshis. So the base means for the sake of, and Reshis is a proper noun or pronoun that alludes to either the Jewish people or Torah, and the words come in time. I'm just glossing over this. This is, I have books on this and there's lots of discussion, but just a general idea. But it's telling you that that God made creation for the sake of Torah and the Jewish people. Without that it's not going to work. In fact, the Medrash says and points out that God made a condition with creation that if the Jewish people accept Torah and live by Torah, the creation is allowed to exist. If it doesn't, it has to revert back to null and void, which could be world wars, for example, or whatever the case may be. It could be even more destructive. The war of Gog and Magog, that's a built-in consequence of the Jewish people not living by Torah, alluded to by the first word of the Chumash itself. The third level is called drush, from like the word medrash, which means to investigate, or exegesis in English, exegetical teachings. And these are not things you're going to notice necessarily from the verse itself. It's usually a tradition that has been passed down from Moshe at Mount Sinai all the way down to modern times that gives you some background information to the story. So, for example, the word Bereshis can be divided into two parts. Bara, Shis. Shis is Aramaic for six. There's an explanation for that too. And the word Bara means he created. So the word Bereshis on the level of Drush means Bara Shis, for the sake, he created six at the beginning. Six what? 6 days of creation. Says the Medrash, 6,000 years of history, too, including this moment right now, this next moment, this next moment. If the moment exists until Moshiach comes, until the end of history, all of it was made, at least in potential, at the very first moment. How do I know this? The first word, Bereshis, Barashis. Good. The last level is Sod. The Samach, Sod, which of course means secret, which means Kabbalah. So then what's the Kabbalistic explanation of the word Bereshis? Again, Barashis, but this time the six refers to the six spheres of Chesed, Givur, Tiferes, Netzach, Yesod, and Malchus. In case you don't know what those are, open your article, Sidurim, and the spheres of Omer. Tonight's the 36th favorite number. Omer, right? We counted tonight 36, and it lists the different midos that are being worked upon, the different things. Basically, these are called spheros or sphirot. And they are spiritual entities used by God to transfer his light down to us so that we can live and exist, but on a level that we won't die either, for that matter, because too much of God's light destroys also. Too little, there's no life, no existence. So it has to be measured. So the means of regulating the divine light, God's light, that the world can exist as it does, basically are the spheres. That's what it is. And those six spheres, which govern our 6,000 years of history, Chesed the first 1,000, we're now in the 6th millennium, correspond to Yesod. And you can look up online, because these days all this stuff is explained in detail. You can just Google it and see Wikipedia. And they are the basis, the spiritual DNA, if you will, of our history. All in one word: Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. 4 levels of Torah learning, 4 levels of accessing information that is absolute truth. You listen to the scientists talk. it's when people talk about evolution, talk about spontaneous existence and the Big Bang Theory, and the very bright people, very, very, very bright people who claim to be telling you the truth. And you just walk up to one of them and say, okay, fine. You claim to know the truth. What you're saying you think is established fact. But let me ask you a question. Have you learned Torah? The Bible doesn't really. Have you looked in the level of Pshat, on Remez, Drush, and Sod? Do you know what Adam Kadmon is? Do you understand what the spheres are, how the whole system works? Have you even looked at that even a little bit? Because if you did, you would think about life and reality completely differently. Your whole perspective would change. Just ask any religious scientist, any Torah observant scientist who does not see the same thing as the atheist does. Why? Because he has the background. He has the access to truth, the absolute truth. So when he looks at something, or a doctor for that matter, he looks at something, he sees this thing which one person says, nah, that's the way nature works. That evolved to be like that. The other person says, well, that doesn't fit in with the absolute truth. I can show it, I can compare it to you. And therefore the person will know the truth. That's just in terms of levels of Torah. Then you have what's called Maisa Avos Lambani, as the Ramban points out in Parshas Lech Lecha, that the idea that our forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, when they did things not only to teach us how we're supposed to live, what's meaningful in life, but they also laid the foundation for all of history after that. They could do that. Our generation, you put away money for your future, fine. You try to leave a legacy for your children, fine. They did much more than that. They were able to affect the future way ahead, much further on than they were in fact living, because they belonged to a very unique spiritual period called the period of the Avos, the forefathers, which the Ramchal, Rav Moshiach Chaim calls the period of roots. It's a different period today, much later history towards the end, and they could have that type of impact. So we can read the narrative of the Torah and learn how to behave, learn what life is about, because we have that measure of absolute truth through the forefathers themselves, or what God approves of in the Torah. This week's parsha is Parshas Bahar B'Chukusai. B'Chukusai is the first version of the brachos and the kalalas, the blessings and the curses. The blessings for doing the will of God and the curses for not doing the will of God. It's not about reward and punishment. As the Gemara points out, reward and punishment, that comes later in the world to come, or Gehenna, whatever the case may be. But what about all these curses? The word, like the word kilko is means to destroy. If God says the starting point is not that God simply reacts angrily. He says, if you're going to do the following, if you're going to act in the following way, if you're going to act and you're going to live as if there's no absolute truth, or you're going to live and distort that absolute, you're going to lie and pretend it's the truth, then this is the result. This is what's going to happen. Creation's going to cave in on you because it's not built to support sheker for such a long time on such a grand scale. Just creation can't handle it. The flood happened because creation can't handle that much falsehood. Not that just God got angry and then broke everything. No, it's because creation's built as an expression of God's truth to give us a chance to be partners in the completion of creation, which is an expression of that truth. We're not going to do it. It's not like God, well, that didn't work out. Okay, I'm going someplace else. I'm going to try someplace else. I'll just leave these guys alone to make a mess of their world. No. Creation is something very, very serious and very holy and very important to God. And it's built into creation that people have to live by truth. And they can live by falsehood for a period of time. And you can get away with it, not because God's abandoned mankind or go someplace else. Don't make the mistake of thinking that God's patience means his absence. He's watching it all. Like in an operating theater, where they're operating down below and up above are doctors and nurses, and watching the operation take place very quietly. God's up there with all his angels looking down, watching everything and waiting. Hopefully there's going to be a change of heart. But if not, then creation will be allowed to do what it does when that situation in fact happens. Revert back to chaos and destruction and the things we've witnessed for thousands of years of history already. So just the last point for now. right? So when a person performs mitzvahs, and they are 613, and Kabbalah explains that each of the mitzvahs corresponds to either one of our tendons or one of our limbs, right? The positive mitzvah corresponds to the limbs because you get up and do things with your limbs, and they're positive mitzvahs to act, and the negative mitzvahs tell you to not do things, so that's more passive, but it's still a very, very important mitzvah to preserve the world and give us the chance to be able to fix the world, right? When a person does that, they do a mitzvah, and to the extent they do the mitzvah properly, then they not only rectify themselves, they in fact rectify the world at the same time, because the mitzvahs themselves correspond to the structure of creation, and the more a person does the mitzvah with the proper intention, the more that's going to have the desired tikkun for everything. The second thing is learning Torah. When a person learns Torah, and again, the more you pay attention, the more you understand it. My Rosh Hashiva had, there were four things we had to ask yourself. We learned Gemara, for example. What does it say? What does Rashi say? Do you agree? What do you say differently? And what does Tosfos say? And finally, what does it teach you about life? Because that's the bottom line. What does this idea, this concept, teach you about life in this world and how to live? So when a person learns Torah, they are in fact learning the absolute truth. The more they learn it, the more they have it. The more they have it, the more they have that measuring stick to know if what they're doing is only opinion, is subjective, or in fact an accurate representation of God's truth. The bottom line, the Gemara says that the world was made for fear of God. That's the whole point of creation, that people should fear God. And the Gemara says elsewhere, Kol b'dei shemayim chutz me'yir shemayim. Everything's in the hands of God except the fear of God, which means basically that whatever's going to take place, God's really behind all that. What's our free will for? What are we supposed to accomplish? Fear of God. So what is that fear of God? So on one level, fear of punishment, like this week's parsha. Do this, you get rewarded. Do this, and bad news. You're going to suffer. That's a lower level of fear of God. Like the word lirot, years fear, like the word lirot to see. It's the seeing of God. The Gemara is telling you that the creation was made for man to be able to learn truth, to understand what absolute truth is. God gave us the Torah to be able to do this. The measure of a society and the integrity of a society is going to be based upon three things in the end. Number one, belief in God, and therefore seeing Him and fearing Him, but meaning that you have awe of that absolute truth. Enough awe that it's going to guide your life and your actions. Number two, you have to believe that God shared His absolute truth with mankind. You don't believe in that? It's not going to help you. A person can believe in God and say, yeah, I believe in God, but Kate Torah? I don't think so. So then you're no better off in the end, because you have no idea what He wants. You have to believe that God shared His truth with man too. These are two conditions right off the bat. Number three, you have to believe in the existence of a Yetzer Hara, that we have one built in. It's part of who we are, and that we have to control it, and that it can trick us, and that it's not interested in truth. It's interested in survival, and survival has many different levels. One person's survival is another person's chetz. It's not, but that's the Yetzer Hara. If you don't have these three levels of reality, these three levels of belief and understanding, by definition, society is going to become hefker, licentious. That's what we have today. Shocked by what's going on? Disappointed, perhaps. Afraid of what's going on? 100%. It's not comfortable to see what's going on, all the lying going on and the corruption, for sure. And they didn't call it a swamp for no reason. But shocked and surprised when people don't believe in God or barely believe in God, and they certainly don't have respect for the Torah and don't see it as being from God, so therefore we have no real source of absolute truth as far as they're concerned, and no recognition at all of the Yetzer Hara and the role it plays in their decision-making process. The world we have today, that's what you get. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said at the beginning, it's a siman from Moshiach's arrival, because the world can't exist much longer like this. It's built to respond even earlier. It's actually a miracle that we haven't suffered more because of the situation as it exists right today. But the way things are going, what's happening right now, undoubtedly based upon what the Gemara says, both pieces of Gemara, that this is clearly the situation as it existed in our time, and therefore clearly an imminent, or at least a sign of Mashiach's imminent arrival. There's no other way to look at it. The Gemara said it. We should merit to see the turnaround. That first of all, in our own personal lives, we should be able to know the truth, and not only know the truth but live by it, and also merit to see the falsehood eradicated from all of society, so we can finally build the utopian reality the Torah describes and people dream about in our lifetime.
Rabbi Winston, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You have time for a question?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm one of these people, and I think I'm speaking for a few people here. Do you have any specific examples of the lies, the shecher that's going on regarding the Geula right now that you could share with us without naming names or pointing anybody or anything out?
Well, I'll just say one thing for sure. The media is atrocious. It's absolutely atrocious. I mean, what goes on, the backtracking and the lying and the falsification of information, or the sloppy coverage of investigations, to suit their own means. It would seem to me, I mean, not just to me but others as well, there's a liberal agenda. And I say liberal agenda, I mean one that, in general, just look at the side. Whichever side has the most amount of God in it, even though both sides might be missing, but just look at the two sides. The side that's godless, for the most part, God does not play a role in their approach. It's basically trying to make life more comfortable for people. And people are constantly distorting. The media itself they're supposed to be one of the most reliable sources of information for people, because that's what we depend upon to know what's going on. They came into existence specifically to act as a liaison between the government and the people, between the events of the world and the people. We can't all travel the whole world. We're not correspondents, covering things in Wuhan or wherever the case may be. That's their job. Their job is to go see, report what's going on to the best of the ability according to the truth. And now it just seems that everybody just has an agenda, and mostly a liberal agenda, with the exception of a few, of media resources. But they believe in it. They don't believe they're doing evil. They think they're doing the truth. That's the level of truth I spoke about, where they don't have an objective standard to measure against. They feel that what they want is what the world needs, and then they feel justified in distorting the truth in order to accomplish that in the long run. And of course, now it's coming back out. It's backfiring somewhat, even going very high up in the system. But these people really believe what they were doing. They're not just, if you ask them, what you do, is that evil? And they're going to say, no, of course it's not evil. We were doing what we thought was best for mankind, best for our people. But that's the result of truth when you take God out of the picture. It just becomes a human opinion, and you get tremendous, there's no balancing point. There's no way to establish what the truth is, because they have no way to determine it. It's just what they want it to be. And that's just one major source, but it's all over.
Well, that's very true in regards to Israel in particular, but that really does go to evil. I think there are people that purposely, distort the news, distort photographs that we see over here, distort what we do with the Arabs, distort what we do with religious people, with non-religious people, every single aspect of Israel. The media all over the world they have no shame. They just outright lie about Israel.
But if you were to ask them, why are they doing that? They would tell you, because we believe that ultimately speaking, there's going to be peace in the Middle East. We have to surrender to the Arabs everything they want, and then they'll be happy. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous and proven to be false over and over again. But that's what they've convinced themselves of, because they don't want to go to war anymore. They don't want to fight. It's as they once said. I think there was a joke about this, but it takes too long to tell the joke. But the bottom line is, there's two ways to spell peace: P-E-A-C-E or P-I-C-E-E. P-I-E-C-E, right? And some people who get sick and tired of having to fight for peace, which just takes so long, because it takes all the proper conditions, prefer the other version of piecing everything up and giving it away. Of course, in the end, it becomes 10 times more dangerous, and they totally misjudge. Before 9/11, you have to understand that the world looked at the Arab world completely different. They did not relate whatsoever to the way we looked at it, and they blamed us for what was going on in the Arab world. And then finally, it came to America, and they realized that these people have an agenda of their own, and they want to, they have their plans. Again, if you don't have absolute truth as a measure, as a standard, because it gives you the ability to say, it's like it's like you're trying to find the proper color paint for your house to match what you have in your kitchen, and you decide, I know what the color is, and you go to the paint store, and you see 50 different shades of the same color, and all of a sudden you can't remember for all effort, you can't come up with what the proper color is, and you're going to make a mistake. Or you could take a paint chip with you of the original color to the store, and you can take it, you can hold it up, and you can compare. And you might be surprised which one actually matches in the end. So that's the difference. The world doesn't have that standard. They just totally based upon. I was actually once I had to go to a driver's refresher course. It was 8 hours, 4 hours one day, 4 hours the next day. Very difficult thing to go through, And during one of the breaks, interesting enough, there was a lot of teenagers there, and it was right at the time of Hitnakut, the time of the disengagement from Gaza Strip, and I was actually shocked to hear the opinion of some teenagers from Tel Aviv about what to do, why it was justified and how it's going to play itself out. Of course, they were 100% wrong. I wish I could have gone back to these teenagers and said, "You still feel the same way?" They probably would have justified and rationalized and said, "Yeah, it's only because of But their opinion was that doing this was the best thing in the world, and they were so negative towards their own Israeli brethren who had built it up and had been forced out, and so sympathetic to the Arabs who lived to wipe them off the face of the map. And this is the perspective they had. They really believed. But then again, they believe in all kinds of things that are anti-Torah. So this standard is necessary for the truth, and we don't have it today. It's almost, when they took, for example, you saw the pattern. They started taking religion out of the classroom. They took down statues of Moshe. They took down statues of the Ten Commandments because it was unconstitutional. You can't force religion on people. What it was basically doing is stripping society of absolute truth. Next week's talk, if God willing we get to that, is basically about conspiracies and how the Torah approached the whole concept of conspiracies, how we're supposed to deal with it, what does it actually mean as a work, because they're obviously abounding today all over the place. But it's all part of the same idea. It has to do with this idea of absolute truth versus false truths and having a standard to measure by. So, that's the situation today.
Right. And then we were always taught to look at the news here and abroad as through the eyes of the Torah. So this is one thing we must try to train ourselves to do. Too.
Yeah, that's for sure. But at this point, to the beginning, I used to say, I think it was Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky who said that he looked at the news only to see the hand of God in history. That's the only reason why. If you ever looked at the newspaper, that was the only reason why. He looked at because that's the only justification. I would say that when he did that was back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, when the news still pretty was honest. At that time, there were agendas, but no one had the chutzpah to push them as they do today. I would say today, even looking at the news is just dangerous. It's just frustrating and dangerous and scary because sheker like all over the place. It's almost a game.
You can't believe anything. You can't believe anything. So that's something maybe you'll talk about next week. Conspiracy. Discovering that there are barcodes in our pills and things like this, just to track us. I mean, there's so much out there now that's really insane. And you don't know where the sources are. The source.
Yeah, well, there's what to look at over there, but I just as a small example that you can't really disprove things. But when I was working on the notes for next week's class, it came to me. So I was looking at the mentality of a conspirator. I wanted to understand from a psychological point of view how the world looks at people, like what drives a person to believe in conspiracies where another person doesn't believe in conspiracies. Right. There's basically two types of people: those who believe in them and those who don't want to believe in them. And what makes one versus the other. So I Googled, mentality of a conspirator, very specifically. What came up was only a list of conspiracy theories and why they are crazy, and the people believe in them are just pushing their own personal agendas. Literally one after the other. So I thought maybe I made a mistake, so I changed the wording. Again, like what I was looking for was very different than what came up. But someone typed the word conspiracy, and Google wanted you to see that conspiracy theories are nuts. They don't make any sense whatsoever. There's no truth to them at all. Now, again, I'm not pushing it. That's saying what they are, and I'm not trying to say that they have to believe in them. All that we'll discuss that, God willing, next week. Again, who knows what the real truth is in the end? But I'm just saying that you see that people have their agendas. Everybody, all of us. I have my agenda. You have your agenda. We all have agendas. So what determines whether one's good, one's bad? If I believe in God, if I believe in truth, and I have fear of God, that's the bottom line. I need that outside verification. Otherwise, I'm going to distort things. Okay. So B'ezras Hashem, next week.
Thank you very much, and have a good Shabbos. And thank you, Josh. I think
thank you as well.
Josh may be frozen over there, so Josh is going to also say goodnight to us, I'm sure, from the old city. And we hope you join us next week for Rabbi Winston talking about conspiracy theories. And please don't forget to look on the YouTube channel called Bring Them Home. This is one of our motivations to bring Rabbi Winston in, because the Geula is very closely tied to other things happening in history, like making Aliyah, which is a concept that we'd like to talk about too at some point. We talk about it part of the Shiurim anyway. So I have got some projects, and Josh has projects to help bring people to make Aliyah. And if you're interested, please contact Josh Wander on Facebook or Yehuda Shamroth. That's me on Facebook. And we will record these Shiurim and make sure everybody gets them. Are you there, Josh? Or are you going to say goodnight?
No,
okay.
I'm here. I'm saying goodnight to everyone, and thank you for joining us. Again, I apologize for any of the technical difficulties we're going through with the transition of platforms, but hopefully in the coming weeks, everything will be sorted out, and I appreciate your patience.
Good night.